Hello everyone. So this is the first hour of nuclear physics and radioactivity. In this hour we will talk more about nuclear physics, and in the next hour we are going to focus on radioactivity. Now one question from here will come in your NEET examination. As you already know, day in day out with every year NEET is becoming more and more theoretical. This particular chapter is a theoretical chapter. It is recommended to read NCERT of this particular chapter, and without wasting time, let's start this hour. So, what are we going to talk about first? Nucleus. So, the first agenda is nucleus. Nuclei are made up of proton and neutrons. So, electrons are not at all present inside the nucleus. What is present inside the nucleus is proton and neutron, and hence both of them are combinedly called nucleon. So when I say proton, it means proton. When I say neutron, it means neutron. But when I say nucleon, it means that it can be either proton or neutron. They are combinedly called nucleon. The number of protons in a nucleus, called the atomic number or proton number, is represented by the symbol Z. So number of proton in the nucleus decide the nature of the atom. If the number of proton in the nucleus is 10, you will say that the atomic number is 10. And if the atomic number is 10, it means that the number of electrons revolving around this nucleus also have to be 10. So the number of proton in the nucleus determine the characteristic of the atom as well as nucleus. And the symbol we use to represent atomic number is Z. Second thing, bachcho, the number of neutron, also called the neutron number, is represented by capital N. Easy to remember, number of neutron, capital N. The total number of neutron and proton in a nucleus is called its mass number, and that is A. So what is the mass number of a nucleus? The mass number is nothing but the sum of the number of proton represented as Z plus the number of neutron. So the mass number is equal to the total number of nucleons in the nucleus. The total number of nucleons in the nucleus has to be equal to number of proton in the nucleus plus the number of neutron in the nucleus. So we can say that the mass number, the total number of nucleons, equals to number of proton plus number of neutron. Very obvious thing. Next, bacho, neutron and proton, when described collectively, are called nucleons. So collectively, both proton and neutrons are called nucleons. This is something we have talked about already. Next, bacho, nucleus contains two types of particles. So nucleus has got two types of particles inside it. Which are they? Proton and neutron. So protons and neutrons. Next, bacho, nucleides are represented as the symbol XZA. So this is the general symbol to represent the nuclide. Now the symbol goes as XZA. What is X? X represents the chemical symbol of the element. So for helium, X will be He. For nitrogen, X will be N. So X represents the symbol of the element. Z represents the atomic number, that is the number of proton, and A represents the mass number, that is the number of protons plus neutrons. So now let's talk about neutrons. Neutron is a fundamental particle. In our course of study, we are going to discuss about three fundamental particles: proton, neutron, electron, sometime about positron as well, and sometime about neutrino and antineutrino as well. But more or less, we will confine to these three fundamental particles. So neutron is a fundamental particle which is essential constituent of all nuclei except of that of hydrogen atom. In the curious case of hydrogen, we have got only a single proton in the nucleus and the electron revolves around it. Just like we say that alpha particle is nothing but helium nucleus. Similarly, you need to understand that a proton is nothing but hydrogen nucleus. The nucleus of hydrogen contains only proton. It was discovered by Chadwick. It was difficult to find neutron. Electron and proton both were discovered even before the discovery of neutron. Now, bachcho, you should know what is the charge on neutron. Sir, we know that there is no charge on neutron. Neutron is neutral. And you should know what is the mass of neutron. The mass of neutron is 1.6750 into 10 raised to the power of minus 27 kg. Do understand that the mass of neutron is nearly equal to the mass of proton, though slightly greater. So the mass of neutron is nearly equal to mass of proton, but do understand that mass of neutron is greater than mass of proton. It was difficult to find neutron. It was easy to find proton and electron. Why? Because an isolated neutron is not stable. An isolated neutron has got the tendency to break down into proton plus electron. So since an isolated neutron is not stable, it was very difficult to discover a neutron. So a free neutron outside the nucleus is unstable. You need to remember this. A free neutron outside the nucleus is unstable and decays into proton and electron. So one can write an equation using it. One can say that a neutron isolated, which has got no charge, 0, has a mass of 1 mass unit, converts into a proton. Sir, why have you written proton as H11? Because beta, a proton is nothing but hydrogen nucleus. Proton has got charge of 1 and has got mass of 1. So H11 plus beta minus. We take the atomic mass of an electron to be 0. We say that there are two types of beta particle. There is beta plus and there is beta minus. Beta plus means a positron and beta minus means an electron. So we say that a neutron breaks down into a proton plus an electron and plus something called an antineutrino, and definitely energy will be released in the form of photons. But we need to understand that there is one more term here, antineutrino. It was placed here because some of the conservation principles were getting violated if we do not place it here. So it was placed here and was discovered very late after placing it in the equation. Do not focus here right now. About this we will talk in the next hour. Just remember that an isolated neutron is not stable. An isolated neutron has got tendency to break down into a proton and electron and plus some other type of particle, and definitely the reactions which happen spontaneously on their own, in most of such reaction energy do come out. Now but moving on and talking about something important called thermal neutrons. So what are thermal neutrons? Fast neutrons can be converted into slow neutrons. Sir, what is the meaning of fast neutron and slow neutron? Fast moving neutron, a neutron moving at a high speed, can be converted into slow moving neutron by certain material called moderators. Now this is something you should know. What is the job of a moderator in a nuclear reactor? The job of a moderator is to convert a fast moving neutron into a slow moving neutron to reduce the speed of neutron. And which are the moderators commonly used? Paraffin wax, heavy water. Heavy water means which has formula of D2O. Rather than hydrogen being in the molecule, there is isotope of hydrogen which is deuterium in the molecule. So the common example of moderators are paraffin wax, heavy water and graphite. Now bachcho, when fast moving neutrons pass through a moderator, they collide with the molecules of the moderator. As a result of this, the energy of the moving neutron decreases, while that of the molecules of the moderator increases. So if you have got, let's say, graphite and fast moving neutrons are bombarded on it, as the neutrons try to cross through the graphite, as they are fast moving, they have got more energy. They will collide with the molecules of the graphite, transferring some energy to the molecules of graphite, and when they transfer the energy, their own energy decreases and that of moderator increases. After some time, they both attain thermal equilibrium, so that there is no net energy transfer from neutrons from the moderator or from moderator to the neutrons. Once the thermal equilibrium is attained, we say that now these neutrons are thermal neutrons. So the neutrons that are in thermal equilibrium with the molecules of the moderator are called thermal neutrons. So this is asked many a time, Thermal neutrons are fast moving neutrons or slow moving neutrons. Thermal neutrons are slow moving neutrons. The neutrons which are in thermal equilibrium with the molecules of the moderator are called thermal neutrons. You should know this basic thing. So now let's talk of different type of nucleus. You might have heard something called isotopes. Isotopes. Topes means same number of protons. So isotopes are the nuclides which have same atomic number, same number of proton, but different mass number. We know that the mass number equals to atomic number plus the number of neutron. If I am saying that same atomic number but different mass number, it means that the number of neutrons have to be different. So when I say that two particular nucleus are isotopes, it means that they have the same number of protons but different number of neutrons, hence they end up having different mass number. Some example of isotopes are 1H1, 1H2, 1H3. Here you can see that the atomic number in all three is same 111, but the mass number is different 1, 2, 3. This first one has got no neutron, the second one has got one neutron, and this third one has got two neutrons. Their name are hydrogen, deuterium and tritium. Similarly, another example can be taken 8016, 8017, 8018. They all have the same atomic number 8. Hence, they have the same symbol because the atomic number, the number of protons present inside the nucleus provides the characteristic to the element. Now you can see that the number of neutron in the first one is 16 minus 8, 8. The number of neutron in second one, 17 minus 8, 9. The number of neutron in third one, 18 minus 8, 10. So the number of protons are same, the number of neutrons are different, and hence the atomic mass is different. Moving on to the second case, there is something called isobars. When are two different nucleus said to be isobars? Isobars, iso same, bar is something, a term used for pressure. To exert the same pressure, they must have same atomic mass, and to have the same atomic mass, they should have same number of nucleons. So isobars are the nucleus which have same mass number A but different atomic number Z. Same mass number but different atomic number. Some example are 1H3, tritium, and a special type of helium nucleus which has got two proton and only one neutron. So in both the cases, you will say that the mass number is 3. For tritium, we have got one proton and two neutron. For 2He3, we have got two proton and one neutron. But both of them have the same mass number despite having different atomic number of 1 and 2. So this is an example of isobars. One more example, 8017 and 9F17. Here you will say that the number of protons are 8. The number of neutrons are 17 minus 8, which is 9. For the case of 9F17, the number of protons are 9 and the number of neutrons are 17 minus 9, which is 8. The number of neutrons are different. The number of protons are different, but their sum is same for both of them. So such nucleus are said to be isobars. Next one. There is something called isotones. Isotopes, same number of protons. Isotones, same number of neutrons. So isotones are the one which have got equal number of neutrons. Hence, for them, both the atomic number Z and the mass number A are different. Atomic number is different. Mass number is different, but the number of neutrons are same for two nucleus to classify as isotones. But the value of A minus Z is same. Sir, why can you say that A minus Z has to be same? Can I say that A equals to Z plus N? Yes. If I am saying that two particular nucleus are isotones, it means that they have got the same number of neutrons. And the number of neutrons is nothing but the atomic mass minus the number of protons. So if the number of neutrons are same, it means that A minus Z is same for both the nucleus. So for example, you can have 4Be9 or 5B10. If you look at A minus Z, 9 minus 4, you get 5. 10 minus 5, you get 5. They have the same number of neutrons. or you can have 3Li7 or 4Be8, 7 minus 3 4 and 8 minus 4 4. They have the same number of neutrons. So isotone, same number of neutrons, isobar, same atomic mass, isotope, same number of protons. Now we will talk about mirror nuclei. Mirror nuclei means that if the first nucleus has got 4 proton and 5 neutron, then the second nucleus should have 5 proton and 4 neutron. This is the meaning of mirror nucleus. So nuclei having same atomic mass number has to be same. The sum of number of protons and number of neutrons has to be same. But with proton number Z and neutron number A minus Z interchange. So if the first one has got 6 proton, 7 neutron, then the second one should have 7 proton and 6 neutron. The numbers of proton and neutron interchanged. Such two nucleus are said to be mirror nucleus. The example are 1H3 and 2He3. 1He3, 1 proton, 2 neutron. 2He3, 2 proton, 1 neutron. You can see they are mirror nucleus. One more example, 3Li7 and 4Be7. 3Li7, 3 proton, 4 neutron. 4Be7, 4 proton, 3 neutron. So you can see they are mirror nucleus. Now we will talk about the size of the nucleus. We have already talked that the size of the nucleus is of the order of Fermi. But as the mass number increases, there are more and more number of neutron and more number of proton. The radius of the nucleus starts to increase. So we say that the nuclear radius is found to be experimentally to be proportional to the mass number raised to the power of 1 by 3. So experimental result indicates that the nucleus radius is proportional to A raised to the power of 1 by 3. So radius is proportional to A raised to the power of 1 by 3, where A is the mass number of nucleus. Mass number is nothing but the total number of nucleons. So we can say that the radius is proportional to mass number raised to the power of 1 by 3. So think of two nucleus, nucleus 1 and nucleus 2. If let's say the first nucleus has got 10 nucleons. When I say 10 nucleons, it means that the sum of the number of proton and the number of neutron is 10. And the second nucleus has got 80 nucleons. The number of nucleons is nothing but the mass number. If the mass number becomes 8 times, the radius becomes 8 raised to power of 1 by 3 times. It means that the radius becomes twice. So if the first nucleus has a radius r, the second nucleus will have a radius 2r. So you need to understand this. The radius is proportional to mass number raised to power of 1 by 3. So if the mass number becomes n times, the radius becomes n raised to power of 1 by 3 times. So if the mass number is double, the radius is 2 raised to power of 1 by 3 times. If the mass number becomes 5 times, the radius is 5 raised to power of 1 by 3 times. Now bachcho, we know that radius is proportional to a raised to power of 1 by 3. What do physicists do? Every time they find a proportionality, they add up a proportionality constant, and we say that the radius of a nucleus equals to r naught into a raised to power of 1 by 3. Here r naught is the proportionality constant, or you can say r naught is the radius for a nucleus having mass number of 1. Can you tell me the name of a nucleus which has got mass number of 1? Yes sir, hydrogen. So you can say that r naught is nothing but the radius of hydrogen's nucleus. Now r equals to r naught a raised to power of 1 by 3. The value of r naught is nothing but 1.2 into 10 raised to power of minus 15 meter, or you can say it to be equals to 1.2 Fermi. So r equals to r naught a raised to power of 1 by 3. This is something you should know. Next bachcho, heavier nuclei are bigger in size than lighter nuclei. Isn't it obvious? Heavier nuclei means it has got more number of nucleons, and as the number of nucleons increases, as A increases, definitely the radius should increase. Next bachcho, let's talk about nuclear volume. We know that the volume is nothing but 4 by 3 pi r cube for a sphere. So if we substitute the radius as r naught a raised to power of 1 by 3, we can say that the volume of the nucleus will be given by V equals to 4 by 3 pi r cube, and substituting the value of r as r naught a raised to power of 1 by 3, we will get 4 by 3 pi into r naught a raised to power of 1 by 3 whole cube. That becomes 4 by 3 pi r naught cube into a. Now do understand, this r naught is a constant. It is the radius of the hydrogen nuclei. So we can say, substituting this value, v equals to 4 by 3 pi r naught cube into a. Hence the volume of nucleus is directly proportional to the mass number. So do remember this thing. If the mass number becomes double, the volume becomes double. If the mass number becomes triple, the volume becomes triple. So if there are 100 nucleons in the first nucleus and 200 nucleons in the second nucleus, then the second nucleus must have double the volume because it accommodates double the number of nucleons. Now we will talk about the nuclear density, and this is important. How to write density? So density is nothing but mass upon volume. So mass per unit volume of a nucleus is called nuclear density. So no rocket science here, mass per unit volume is the density. One can say that the nuclear density represented by symbol rho is nothing but mass of the nucleus divided by volume of the nucleus. Now, how to write the mass of the nucleus? If every single nucleon is assumed to have a mass m, and we know that in a nucleus the number of nucleons, which is mass number, is a, so the mass of the nucleus definitely becomes mass of one nucleon multiplied by number of nucleon, that is ma. And we have already talked about the volume of nucleus. We know that nucleus has got spherical shape, so the volume will be 4 by 3 pi r cube, and in place of r we can substitute r naught a raised to power of 1 by 3. So once we do this, we say that the mass of nucleus is ma. What is m? The average mass of one nucleon, whether proton or neutron. Do understand that the mass of neutron is nearly same as the mass of proton, though neutron is slightly heavier than proton. And here in the denominator you will get 4 by 3 pi into r naught a raised to power of 1 by 3 whole cube. So where m is what? The average mass of a nucleon, which is nothing but mass of a proton or mass of a neutron, and we treat mass of both of them to be nearly equal to 1.66 into 10 raised to power of minus 27 kg. But again repeating, do remember that neutron is slightly heavier than proton. Now bachcho, Ma represents what? M is the average mass of one nucleon and A is the number of nucleons. So their multiplication represents the total mass of nucleus. So the numerator Ma represents the mass of nucleus. Next thing bachcho, we can now say the nuclear density equals to Ma upon 4 by 3 pi. Cubing this part, you get r naught cube into a raised to power of 1 by 3 whole cube, that becomes a. So a and a get cancelled, and this 3 moves from denominator of denominator to the numerator. So you get the density equals to 3m upon 4 pi r naught cube. Now do understand here, what is m? Sir, m is the mass of one of the nucleon. So m is constant on an average, and r naught is the radius of the hydrogen nuclei. So since both of them are constant, you can say that the density of all nucleus comes out to be more or less the same, as the density is independent of the mass number. The density is independent of the number of nucleons. So on computing this value, we get 2.38 into 10 raised to the power of 17 kg per meter cube, and this is humongous density. It is said that this density is so large that to occupy the entire mass of Earth, if the Earth was made up of material of such density, the entire mass of Earth can be placed over 1 tablespoon. This is such a high density, and this same density is assumed to be the density of black hole. Now bachcho, moving on, notice that the density of nucleus is independent of the mass number. So if I ask you, hydrogen nucleus has got higher density, or helium nucleus has got higher density, or lithium nucleus has got higher density, or sodium nucleus has got higher density, you will say, sir, The density is independent of the number of proton and neutron. The density of the nucleus is independent of the mass number. Hence, all four of them will have the same density. But do understand that just like our Earth is denser at its core and becomes lesser and lesser dense as we move from core to crest, in the same way, the nucleus is most dense at the center, and the density keeps on decreasing as you move from center to the surface. So, density of nucleus is maximum at its center. I'm saying that all different nucleus have the same average density, but for a one single given nucleus, the density is greatest at the center and decreases as we move outward from the nucleus, from the center to the surface. Now we are going to talk about nuclear force, and this is one common doubt which even I had as a child, that if we think of helium, yes, in helium we have got 2 proton and 2 neutron, yes. If in helium we have got 2 proton and 2 neutron, neutrons are neutral, no problem, but the protons have got positive charge. How can you bring 2 positive charges so close and still they are not at all repelling each other, they are maintaining a nucleus? We know that the Coulombic force of repulsion is given by K Q1 Q2 by R square. If you decrease R, if you make it half, the force becomes 4 times. If you make R 1/3, the force becomes 9 times. You have brought 2 protons too close to each other. The Coulombic force of repulsion between them should be humongous. Then why are they not flying away? Because there is one force which is even stronger than Coulombic force of repulsion, and that force is the nuclear force. Nuclear force is the force which keeps the nucleus intact. It is way more dominant, 100 times dominant over the electrostatic force of repulsion. So, forces that keep the nucleons bounded. When I say nucleons, it means proton-proton bounded, proton-neutron bounded, and neutron-neutron bounded. Nucleons. When I say nucleons, I mean both proton as well as neutron. So, forces that keep the nucleons bound in a nucleus are called nuclear forces. First, nuclear forces are short-range forces. Nuclear force won't act between 2 neutrons when they are separated by large distance. For nuclear force to be active, the separation between the nucleons, whether proton-proton or proton-neutron or neutron-neutron, should be of the order of Fermi. So nuclear force is a short-ranged force. So nuclear force are short-range forces. They do not exist at large distances greater than the order of Fermi. So you can't place 2 protons at separation of 1 meter and expect them to attract each other because of nuclear force of attraction. For nuclear force to be active, the separation between the nucleons should be very small, of the order of the size of a nucleus. Second point, nuclear forces are the strongest forces in nature. We say that there are only 4 fundamental type of forces: the strong nuclear, the weak nuclear, the gravitation, and the electrodynamic. Out of these 4 fundamental forces, the type of forces we are discussing right now, nuclear forces, are called the strong nuclear forces, and they are strongest of all the 4 fundamental forces found in nature. No doubt gravitational force is the weakest of these 4. Second बच्चों, these are attractive forces and causes stability of the nucleus. Despite having so many protons in the nucleus which are positively charged, why doesn't the nucleus burst open? Because the nuclear forces acting between the nucleons, proton-proton, proton-neutron, and neutron-neutron, keep the whole nucleus intact, providing the stability to the nucleus. Next point, these forces are charge independent. It means that they act between proton-proton, they act between proton-neutron, they act between neutron-neutron. Nuclear forces act between nucleons, given that the separation between them is of the order of Fermi. Next बच्चों, nuclear forces are non-central forces as well as non-conservative in nature. When we talk about electrostatic forces, And when we talk about gravitational forces, we say that electrostatic forces and gravitational forces act along the line joining the particles. The forces which act along the line joining the particles are called central forces. And these two forces are also conservative in nature. Do remember that nuclear force is not a central force and also non-conservative in nature. Nuclear force is not a central force and also non-conservative in nature. Moving on, let's talk about atomic mass unit. This is many a time asked, what is 1 AMU? And you should know the basic definition of it. So, the unit in which atomic and nuclear masses are measured is called atomic mass unit. Now, what is the proper definition of 1 AMU? 1 AMU, sometimes written also as 1U, 1 unit. 1 AMU is nothing but 1/12 of the mass of a carbon 12 nuclei. So 1 AMU is 1/12 the mass of a carbon 12 nuclei. So if you have a carbon 12 nuclei, divide its mass into 12 equal parts, and one such part will be called 1 AMU. And this mass on calculation comes out to be equal to 1.66 into 10 to the power of minus 27 kg, nearly same as the mass of one proton or one neutron. The mass of electron, proton and neutron are also something we need to discuss right now. The mass of electron is 9.1 into 10 to the power of minus 31 kg. Do remember that the mass of electron is nearly 1/1837 times the mass of proton. And as we said that the mass of proton and mass of neutron are nearly same, one can even say that the mass of electron is nearly equal to 1/1837 times the mass of neutron. The mass of electron is 9.1 into 10 to the power of minus 31 kg. And when we talk in terms of AMU, simply divide 1 AMU by 1837. For the sake of understanding, take it as 2000. So if you do 1 by 2000, you will get 0.001 divided by 2. That will give you 0.0005. And you can see here 0.0005486 AMU. This is the mass of one electron when taken in AMU. Now, bachcho, what is the mass of proton? The mass of proton is nearly equal to the mass of neutron is nearly equal to the mass of 1 AMU, that is 1.66 into 10 to the power of minus 27 kg. We write it as 1.6726 into 10 to the power of minus 27 kg. You can see these two masses are nearly equal. And the mass of proton, though greater than 1 AMU, is nearly equal to 1 AMU. 1.00 till here same, then 7276 AMU, nearly the same as that of 1 AMU. Now let's see the mass of neutron. The mass of neutron is 1.6750. So you can see mass of proton 1.6726, mass of neutron 1.6750, and the multiplier is same, 10 to the power of minus 27 kg. So you can take the mass of neutron to be nearly same as the mass of proton, though the mass of neutron is slightly higher. And here also you can write it in terms of AMU. No need to remember this. Just remember that the mass of proton nearly equal to mass of neutron equals to 1.6 into 10 to the power of minus 27 kg. And the mass of electron is 9.1 into 10 to the power of minus 31 kg. And also remember this thing that the mass of electron can be written as 1/1837 times the mass of proton. So now the important part of this hour starts, mass energy equivalence. According to Einstein, mass and energy are interconvertible. The Einstein's mass energy relationship is given by, everybody knows it, E equals to mc square, and you need to remember it. What is m? Mass. What is c? Speed of light. What is E? The total energy content. But what I tell students to always think of it this way, that the mass of a system equals to the total energy content divided by the speed of light whole square. So it's one and the same thing, but this will help you appreciate something. Let's say you are standing and you are at rest, and then you started running with a large velocity. I ask you in which case the energy of your system will be higher. So you will say, when I'm moving with a large velocity, I even have kinetic energy, so the total energy is higher. If the total energy is higher, then when you are running, the mass should also be higher. So as the speed of a particle increases, the total energy associated with it increases, and hence the mass of the particle increases. You can remember it easily now. Now, bachcho, if 1 AMU of mass is thought, then what has to be the equivalent energy to 1 AMU of mass? So you'll say that 1 AMU of mass is nearly equal to 1.6 into 10 raised to the power of minus 27 kg. If you ask me how much energy is associated with 1 AMU of mass, then that energy has to be nothing but the mass in the SI unit, 1.6 into 10 raised to the power of minus 27, multiplied by the speed of light whole square, 3 into 10 raised to the power of 8 whole square, and here you get the energy in joule. If you convert this energy into mega electron volt, then the energy associated with 1 AMU of mass is equal to 931.5 mega electron volt, which we have written here as 931 mega electron volt. So bachcho, remember that 1 AMU of mass is equivalent to 931 mega electron volt of energy. 1 AMU of mass, 1 AMU is nearly the mass of a proton, and that is nearly the mass of a neutron. So the energy associated with the mass of a proton or with the mass of a neutron is nearly equal to 931 mega electron volt. Now I like to ask this question to students in class. Can a neutron completely convert into energy? Yes. And if a neutron completely converts into energy, then the amount of energy we will get will be nearly equal to 931.5 mega electron volt. Then I ask them next question. Can a proton completely convert into energy? And the answer is no. If a proton completely converts into energy, it will violate the principle of conservation of charge. A proton has charge of plus 1e. If it completely converts into energy, what will happen to this charge? So an isolated proton cannot completely convert into energy, but an isolated neutron can. So let's now talk about something called pair production and pair annihilation. What does it say? Listen carefully. When an energetic gamma ray, what is gamma ray? If you think of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, the most energetic photons are corresponding to gamma radiation. So when an energetic gamma ray photon falls on a heavy substance, it is absorbed by some nucleus of the substance, and an electron and a positron are produced. So you have got heavy nucleus. Heavy nucleus means large atomic mass. So sometimes a heavy nucleus absorbs a gamma photon, a high energy photon, and it gives out an electron and a positron. Positron symbol we use is beta plus. This phenomena is called pair production. Sir, can't you have only electron produced? No. Why? Because it will violate the principle of conservation of charge. So every time an electron is produced, a positron is produced with it simultaneously, so that the net charge is balanced and may be represented as the following equation. So first of all, think that you have a heavy nucleus. You bombard it with a gamma photon, high energy photon, and this nucleus, after absorbing the photon, gives you out a beta particle plus beta particle, which is nothing but positron, and a negative beta particle, which is nothing but electron. So this thing can happen. So can you get particles out of energy? A photon is purely a packet of energy. The answer is yes. And this justifies the Einstein's energy mass equivalence statement. Now the mathematical equation goes like, the photon gives you a positron as well as an electron. Plus beta means positron, minus beta means electron. Do understand that when I talk about positron, positron is not same as a proton. No. A proton has got mass nearly equal to the mass of neutron, while the mass of positron, a beta plus particle, is equal to the mass of a beta minus particle, which is an electron. So the mass of a positron is very small compared to the mass of a proton, because the mass of electron is 1/1837 times the mass of proton. So the mass of positron beta plus is also 1/1837 times the mass of proton. So positron is way lighter than a proton. but the positron has got same amount of charge plus E as that on a proton. So do remember that a positron and an electron are antiparticle of each other. They are always produced in a pair, that's why called pair production, and they always die together, that's why called pair annihilation. Now, the energy associated with the mass of one electron will be how much? So you will say that the energy associated with the mass of one electron will be how much? We know that the mass of one electron is nearly 1 upon 1837 times the mass of proton. And the mass of proton can be said to be approximately equal to 1 AMU. And the energy associated with the mass of proton, which is 1 AMU, is nearly equal to 931.5 mega electron volt. Since the mass of electron is 1837 times smaller, the energy associated with the electron's mass will be 1 upon 1837 times smaller compared to that of a proton. So 931.5. So what you get here is nearly, take it like 900 and take it like 1800, you get half. So that is 0.5 mega electron volt. So the energy associated with the mass of electron is 1800 times smaller compared to the energy associated with the mass of proton. Hence, the energy associated with the mass of electron is nearly equal to 0.5 mega electron volt. Now beta, the rest mass energy of each positron and electron is equals to their mass times the speed of light whole square. And with this when calculated in the SI unit and then converted into mega electron volt, you get equal to 0.51 mega electron volt. For the sake of simplicity, just remember 0.5 mega electron volt or 0.51 to be more precise. So we say that the minimum energy of photon for pair production has to be equals to 1.02 mega electron volt. Whenever you have pair production, you have a positron created, you have an electron created. The energy associated with the mass of both positron as well as electron is equal to 0.51 mega electron volt. Hence, the energy of this photon should be at least equal to the sum of the mass energy of these two. And that will be equals to 0.51 plus 0.51. That gives you 1.02 mega electron volt, and that has to do with the minimum energy of this incident photon. Moving on, let's now talk about pair annihilation. The converse phenomena of pair annihilation is also possible. Whenever an electron and a positron, not proton, electron and a positron come very close to each other, they annihilate each other by combining together, and at least two gamma photons, packet of energy, are produced. This phenomena is called pair annihilation, and it is represented by the following equation. So you say that a positron and an electron come together, they annihilate out together, and this gives out at least birth to two gamma photons. Sir, why at least two gamma photons? Reason being, let's say you have got a positron at rest and an electron at rest. They are just going to combine. I ask you, what is the momentum of this system right now? Sir, they are very close and they are at rest. The momentum of the system is zero. If I say when they annihilate, they produce only one photon and this photon moves towards right, so this violates the principle of conservation of momentum. Initial momentum was zero. You have got finally a momentum towards right. This can't happen. Hence, at least two photons should be created. If one of the photon move towards right, then the other photon should move towards left, cancelling out each other's momentum. So whenever pair annihilation takes place, and given that initially the positron and electron were very close to each other and at rest, then at least two of the gamma photons must be produced for the sake of conservation of momentum. Now, bachon, we will talk about something called nuclear stability. Among about 1500 known nuclides, sir, how come 1500? Beta, every single element has got more than one type of nucleus present. For example, hydrogen, deuterium, tritium, right? So only for hydrogen, one proton, you know already three type of stable nucleus. So among about 1500 known nuclide, less than 260 are stable. The other are unstable and decay to form stable nuclide by emitting alpha, beta, or gamma particles. What are alpha particles? So alpha particles are nothing but helium nuclei. Helium nuclei means a collection of 2 proton and 2 neutron. Or unstable nuclei converts into stable nuclei after giving out beta particles. There are 2 types of beta particles. There is beta plus, which is positron, and there is beta minus, that is electron. Or they give out gamma waves. Gamma waves are nothing but high energy EM waves, high energy photon packets. Now they do not have any charge, but they have high amount of energy packed into them. This process is called radioactivity. So when an unstable nuclei convert into a stable nuclei by giving out some particle, this phenomenon is called radioactivity. The stability of nucleus is determined by many factors. Few such factors are given below. So the first one is neutron-proton ratio. N by Z ratio, this is called. The chemical property of an atom are governed entirely by the number of protons. Once more repeating it. The chemical property of an atom are governed entirely by the number of protons. Because whatever the number of protons are there inside the nucleus, that is the atomic number. And you have learned in chemistry that hydrogen, deuterium, tritium, despite having nucleus of different configuration, since all 3 of them have same number of proton, 1, 1, 1, their chemical properties are more or less same. Isotopes show nearly the same chemical properties. So, the chemical property of an atom are governed entirely by the number of protons in the nucleus. The stability of a nucleus appears to depend on both the number of protons and number of neutrons. I'm not saying stability of atom, I'm saying stability of nucleus. Stability of atom and stability of nucleus are 2 different things. You might have a noble gas, for example argon, whose atom is stable but nucleus is not stable. Stability of atom and stability of nucleus are 2 different things. Now bachcho, for lighter nuclei, the greatest stability is attained when the number of proton and neutron are approximately equal. For lighter nucleus, for example hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, these smaller nucleus, the nucleus is more stable when the number of protons and the number of neutrons are nearly equal. So when the N by Z ratio is nearly equal to 1. So for lighter nucleus, for stability, the N by Z ratio should be equal to 1. Now bachcho, talking about larger nucleus. Heavy nuclei are stable only when they have more number of neutrons than the number of protons. To understand, as the number of protons in a nucleus will increase, the Coulombic force of repulsion between the protons will increase. To have a heavy nucleus stable, there should be more and more number of neutrons present in between these protons so that the nuclear force dominates over the Coulombic force of repulsion. So, to understand, heavy nuclei are stable only when they have got more neutrons than protons. Thus, heavy nuclei are neutron rich compared to lighter nuclei. In case of lighter nuclei, the ratio of proton to neutron is 1:1. But in case of heavy nuclei, the number of neutrons are greater usually than the number of protons. For heavy nuclei, more the number of protons in the nucleus, greater is the electrical repulsive force between them and lesser stable will be the nucleus. That's why in case of heavy nuclei, we need more number of neutrons compared to proton. And for heavy nucleus to be stable, the number of neutrons to the number of protons must be greater than 1. Kind of 1.2, 1.3 or 1.4. So now we will talk about mass defect and binding energy, and this is really important. Now, first of all, we need to focus on mass defect. What is the meaning of this term? Mass defect, the defect in the mass. But why will there be any defect in the mass? Let's understand. So, mass defect denoted by delta M is, it is found that the mass of the nucleus is always less than the sum of the mass of its constituent nucleons in free state. This difference in the mass is called mass defect. What? You are trying to say that the mass of the nucleus is less than the sum of the mass of the nucleons used to make that nucleus. Yes. Think of the case of carbon 612. Carbon 612 is made up of 6 protons and 6 neutrons. So if you think of 6 isolated protons and if you think of 6 isolated neutrons, they come together to form the carbon 612 nucleus. What I'm saying right here is that the combined mass of these 6 protons plus these 6 neutrons when they have formed the nucleus is less than the sum of their individual masses. But sir, how is this possible? Do understand that the universe craves for stability and stability is always attained at lower energy level. You know that a carbon 612 nucleus is stable. Sir, how do I know? Because you find it in the universe, it is sufficient proof that it is stable. If it would have been unstable, you won't be able to find it. It must have disintegrated to something else. If you are finding it in universe, it means that it is stable. So when we know that a carbon 612 nucleus is stable and stability is always attained at lower energy level. This means that when these 12 nucleons, 6 proton and 6 neutron come together to form the carbon 612 nucleus, it means that it must have given out some energy. So the energy of the nucleus is less than the combined energy of the individual. That's why this nucleus has been formed. Since the energy is less, now think using the Einstein's mass energy equivalence. You can think of the mass as the total energy content upon c square. Since using the stability argument, I can say that the energy of the nucleus formed is less, it means that its mass is less. So once more repeating the statement, it is found that the mass of nucleus is always less than the sum of the masses of the constituent nucleons in free state. Sir, how can you say always less? Can't it be more? Beta, if the mass will be more, it means that energy will be more, and if it will have more energy, it will be unstable, it will get decayed, and you won't be able to observe such a nucleus. If you are able to observe a nucleus in the universe, you are able to observe it because it's stable, and for it to be stable, it must have lower energy, hence it must have lower mass. This difference in the mass is called the mass defect. So we can write delta M, the mass defect, as nothing but sum of the mass of the nucleons minus the mass of the nucleus. Sum of the mass of the nucleons minus the mass of the nucleus. So let's say you have got this nucleus having the number of protons Z and the number of neutrons A minus Z. So you will say that the sum of the mass of nucleons, if they would be isolated, will be the number of protons Z multiplied by mass of one proton. And the mass associated with the neutrons will be the number of neutrons multiplied by mass of one neutron. So you will say that the mass defect is nothing but the number of protons, atomic number, times the mass of one proton, plus the number of neutron, which is nothing but atomic mass minus the atomic number, times the mass of one neutron. This becomes the sum of mass of all the nucleons if they were isolated, minus the mass of nucleus. This gives you the mass defect. Now usually we can't play with the nucleus, we can play with the atoms. So we even define mass defect for the atom. But what is the difference between nucleus and atom? When we talk about atom, we have to even consider the electrons. So we can write the same mass defect as the number of protons times the mass of proton. In a neutral atom, the number of protons is same as the number of electrons. So we can take the overall mass of the electrons in the atom to be equals to number of electrons, same as number of proton, multiplied by mass of one electron Me, plus the number of neutrons multiplied by the mass of one neutron minus the mass of the atom. Just like it is found that the mass of the nucleus is less than the sum of the mass of individual nucleon, the mass of the atom M dash is also found to be less than the sum of the mass of protons used, electrons used, and neutrons used. So here beta, remember that MP is mass of proton, Mn is mass of neutron, Me is mass of electron, Capital M, this term is nothing but the mass of nucleus. Z is the atomic number, that is the number of proton. A is the mass number, which is nothing but the number of nucleons, the number of proton plus number of neutron. M dash is the mass of the atom as a whole, including the electrons. Now, bachcho, one important thing. The mass of a typical nucleus is about 1% less than the sum of the mass of the nucleons. So it is found that if, let's say, when we add up the individual mass of nucleons, assuming them to be isolated, it comes out to be M. It is found that on an average, the nucleus has got a mass 1% smaller than the sum of the mass of individual nucleons. If the individual nucleon's mass when added is M, then the mass of the nucleus will be 1% smaller, 99 M by 100. So the mass defect will be nothing but M minus 99 M by 100. That will be equals to M by 100. Now, bachcho, moving on and talking about binding energy. Now, this is something really important. The neutrons and protons in a stable nucleus are held together by nuclear force, and energy is needed to pull them infinitely apart. So if you have got, let's say again, nucleus of carbon 612, it has got 6 protons and 6 neutrons. Now all these nucleons are attracted to each other by nuclear force. If you wanted to separate them and move all the nucleons away from each other so that they do not have any effect on each other, you will have to do work, right? Now, it says that the energy is needed to pull them infinitely apart, or the same energy is released during the formation of nucleus. When these 6 protons and these 6 neutrons came together to form the nucleus, they gave out some energy. That energy is the binding energy. Or once the nucleus has been formed, the amount of energy that has to be given to separate all these nucleons again to infinite separation, that is called the binding energy. So this energy is called the binding energy of the nucleus. Or the binding energy of the nucleus may be defined as the energy equivalent to the mass defect of the nucleus. If during the formation of the nucleus, the mass defect is delta M, then the binding energy will be nothing but the energy associated with this mass defect. So the binding energy will be nothing but delta M into C square. Now beta, if delta M is the mass defect, then according to Einstein's mass energy relationship, we will say that the binding energy equals to delta M into C square. And in place of delta M, you can write the number of protons times the mass of proton plus A minus Z number of neutrons times the mass of neutron minus the mass of nucleus. This whole term becomes mass defect into C square. This binding energy is expressed in joule because delta M is being measured in kg. When you are using binding energy equals to delta M into C square, it means that you are using the SI system. But if you have to play with AMU, then better do understand that if delta M is measured in AMU, then the binding energy will be how much? So remember that for 1 AMU of mass, the energy equivalent is 931.5 mega electron volt. So for delta M AMU of mass, how much will be the binding energy? So sir, for 1 AMU you get 931.5. For delta M AMU, you will get delta M times 931.5. So if delta M is measured in AMU, then the binding energy will be delta M into 931 mega electron volt. Keep this in mind. So if for certain question you find that the mass defect is 0.018 AMU, then the binding energy will be nothing but 0.018 multiplied by 931.5 mega electron volt. Be very cautious about the units. Now bachcho, let's talk about binding energy per nucleon. The average energy required to release a nucleon from the nucleus is called binding energy per nucleon. So what is the total energy released during the formation of the nucleus divided by the number of nucleons involved in the synthesis of nucleus? That is called binding energy per nucleon. Now, the binding energy per nucleon, as the name itself says, is nothing but the total binding energy upon the total number of nucleon. And the total number of nucleon is nothing but the mass number, that is the total number of nucleons. Now, bachcho, we know that if the mass defect is given in AMU, we can write the binding energy as delta M into 931 mega electron volt. And let's say the mass number is A, so we divide it with A. This becomes your basic formula. Do understand that binding energy per nucleon is directly proportional to stability of nucleus. The nucleus will be more stable on the basis of higher binding energy or higher binding energy per nucleon. The answer is a nucleus which has got higher binding energy per nucleon will be more stable. I will tell you some fun fact later, but do understand that stability of nucleus depends upon binding energy per nucleon. The greater the binding energy per nucleon, the greater is the stability of nucleus. So now let's talk about binding energy curve. If the graph between the binding energy per nucleon and the total number of nucleons is plotted, so binding energy per nucleon versus the total number of nucleon mass number graph is plotted, the graph goes something like this. Now, for helium, you find quite high binding energy per nucleon, and you can see the topper of this graph, the particular nucleus which has got highest binding energy per nucleon is iron. Fe56 has the highest binding energy per nucleon. So do remember that Fe56 has the most stable nucleus. Now, I will tell you the fun fact. Actually, beta, uranium has got greater binding energy than that of iron. The binding energy of uranium nucleus is greater than the binding energy of iron nucleus. But which one is more stable? The one which is more stable is the one which has got higher binding energy per nucleon. Since iron has got higher binding energy per nucleon, that's why iron is way more stable than uranium, and you all know that uranium is radioactive. But uranium has got higher binding energy associated with its nucleus. It will become clear, keep listening. Some nuclei with mass number A less than 20 have larger binding energy per nucleon than their neighbor nuclei. For example, you can take the example of helium. Helium here has got abnormally high binding energy per nucleon compared to the nucleus in its vicinity. For example, He24, beryllium, carbon, oxygen and neon have got higher binding energy per nucleon compared to the nucleus in their vicinity. Second thing, beta, these nuclei are more stable than their neighbors. If they will have higher binding energy per nucleon, definitely they will be more stable. Next, the binding energy per nucleon is maximum for the mass number A equals to 56. That is for iron. Its value is 8.8 mega electron volt per nucleon. If the binding energy per nucleon is 8.8 mega electron volt, and I know that for iron 56, the number of nucleons are 56, what is the total binding energy of iron? You will say, sir, that has to be 8.8 into 56, right? Now, listen carefully. For a nuclei having A greater than 56, binding energy per nucleon gradually decreases, and for uranium, somewhere here, where A is 238, the value of binding energy per nucleon drops to 7.5. So for uranium 238, you know that the binding energy per nucleon is less than that for iron. It is 7.5. For iron, it is 8.8. But if I ask you what is the binding energy for uranium nucleus, you will say, sir, that is 7.5 into 238. And it's not rocket science to know that 7.5 into 238 is greater than 8.8 into 56. This means that the binding energy is higher for uranium, but the binding energy per nucleon is higher for iron. And stability depends upon binding energy per nucleon and not on the overall binding energy. Now, beta, let's understand something called nuclear fission and fusion. If we again think of the binding energy per nucleon versus the mass number graph and leave out those rough spots like helium, oxygen and something, and think of a smooth curve, because we have got many nucleus. We know that the topper of this list is iron. Iron has the highest binding energy per nucleon. Now you can think of two particular type of nucleus. The nucleus which has got mass number greater than iron, and the nucleus which has got mass number less than iron. The nucleuses which have got mass number less than iron have got binding energy per nucleon less than that of iron. And same is true for the nucleuses having mass number greater than that of iron. They even have binding energy per nucleon less than that of iron. Now, every nucleus want to convert into iron. So the nucleus having mass number less than that of iron try to combine to form a bigger nucleus and to reach closer to iron. And this phenomenon, when the nucleuses fuse together to form a bigger nucleus, that is called fusion. So the nucleuses which have got mass number less than iron try to combine with each other to increase their binding energy per nucleon and to try to become like iron. This phenomenon is called fusion. And for nucleuses having mass number greater than that of iron, they split out into smaller nucleus and also try to become more stable like iron so as to increase the binding energy per nucleon. This phenomena of a bigger nucleus breaking down into two smaller daughter nucleus is called fission. So what is fusion? When smaller nuclei meet to form a bigger nucleus, that's called fusion. What is fission? When a bigger nucleus breaks down into smaller nucleus, that is called fission. So what's here? When a heavy nucleus splits up into lighter nuclei, then the binding energy per nucleon of the lighter nuclei is more than that of the original heavy nucleus. Thus, a large amount of energy is liberated in this process, and this process is called nuclear fission. Which type of nucleus shows nuclear fission? The type of nucleus which have got mass number more than that of iron. Next, when two very light nuclei combine to form a relatively heavy nuclei, then the binding energy per nucleon increases. Sir, how are you sure that the binding energy per nucleon will increase? Won't? Can't it decrease? Reason is, the universe craves for stability, and stability is always attained at lower energy level. If a process is happening on its own, it is happening to increase the stability, and to increase the stability, binding energy per nucleon should increase. So when two light nuclei combine to form a relatively heavy nucleus, then binding energy per nucleon increases. It increases in both the cases, whether the nucleus undergo nuclear fission or nuclear fusion. In both the cases, the reaction happens so as to increase the binding energy per nucleon. Thus, energy is released in the process, and this process is called nuclear fusion. Who shows nuclear fusion? The nucleus having mass number less than that of iron. So, to understand, a smaller nucleus undergo fusion to form a bigger nucleus having higher binding energy per nucleon, and a bigger nucleus breaks down into smaller undergoing fission so as to also attain higher binding energy per nucleon. Now we need to talk about Q value or energy of nuclear reaction. What is the meaning of Q value? The energy released during nuclear reaction is known as Q value of the nuclear reaction. Q value equals to nothing but mass of reactant, overall mass of reactant, minus the mass of product into C square. Sir, why have you written mass of reactant minus mass of product? This term itself represents how much mass is lost during the nuclear reaction. How can the mass be lost? It is converted into energy and given out into the surrounding, so that the energy of the system decreases and hence the system becomes more stable. So the Q value is nothing but mass of reactant minus the mass of product. This term represents the mass defect times the speed of light whole square. Now do understand, if Q is less than 0, it means that the energy is not released, energy is absorbed. The nuclear reaction is known as endothermic. It takes heat, it does not give out heat. The energy is absorbed in the reaction. And if the Q value is greater than 0, the nuclear reaction is known as exothermic reaction. It means that the energy is released in the reaction. Now that's all for this particular hour. See you guys in the next hour where we will talk more about radioactivity. See you guys in the next hour. Bye bye. So that's all for now. See you guys in the next hour.